As you might imagine, guys, I am running my Plume Monarch build, and again, big emphasis on combo crit and combo multiplier being as high as it can be. I'm working on your, core stats like HP and attack and defense are pretty much key. And then what I like to do is I'm using the Nirvana Spore with these relics, and then I happen to have the new Fallen Angel, which you can still pick up. Because what you can do is basically trigger the effects of the Fallen Angel, which is pretty easy peasy if you've got that with the Nirvana Spore. Because you'll see if HP is below 58%, it will be seen as a 58% for skills that trigger additional effects at low HP or that increase attributes as HP lowers. So therefore you can pretty much quintuple the amount of damage that you're going to be able to do. And this is in every way, kind of like a net benefit. Now, I'll be looking out for the next item that's similar to the Castle Candelabrum, because it's kind of deductive in the way that it works, and that it gives you less and less HP over time. So, like, I could just as easily hop over and use something like the Carnage, for example, where I'll get, some stats back in the form of crits. Could also just as easily use the Chaotic Warhammer, where my combos are going to be doing just that much more damage. And for context, like, what does that do and how does it change your build? Like, I can kick this on and you'll see almost immediately what a difference that makes. You go from being like really tanky when you have the Castle Calibrum to not being very tanky at all. And I mean, is that a problem? I don't know. It depends on what you're ultimately aiming to take away from it, because we're here, I'm not tanky at all. You have to make up for it some other way. If I use like the Warhammer, for example, and do the same thing, same principle, it's basically you wind up getting nerfed into oblivion because you don't really have any HP coming through. So if you get something like the Candelabrum, for example, it's kind of a replacement for that scenario where you're running out of HP. And so like here, you'll see that even though I get hit, HP wise, it comes back pretty quick. Problem with this challenge is it's just doing so much damage that I'm not able to tank it, which tells me I just need more defense. And I know where that problem is. That's really kind of more in the enchant, being that I've only got a level 1, and I'm working on getting the rest of these completed. But that's more than likely where the issue is this being where it's at is where the problem is. Like I probably more than likely need to bring this up in order to really get the net benefit. But anyway, the point is with these in mind, I am using Combo Stealer, which is nothing more than basically something that's going to take extra damage equal to 3% of the target's max HP. The key is it has one-sided attack, which is going to give me 16% combo, plus super crowd combo, which is going to give me a fair bit, and then skill damage and basic attack. I could make it that much better if I had shroom combo on top of this. Like, that would make that much better because of the growth being at 1.4. It's really phenomenal in terms of about the only thing I could do differently is probably throw that out onto, like, say, Bell Ring or even Sunshine Bringer, and it would be just as good. Because it's more about the affixes here than it is anything else. I'm not focusing so much on their abilities, but even that is not necessarily like a bad ability, really. Like, from the standpoint that you're going to be dealing quite a bit of damage on top of what you're already doing, it works out pretty darn well. Now, on that same note, I'm not emphasizing on regen. You might notice that, because like I was saying earlier, where if, let's say, you've got a piece of gear that is in conflict, you can always just build another set for that scenario. So what I've been doing is, anytime I've got regen gear, if it's better than what my current set does, which in this case, it's 0.1% of a difference in regen, but yet I'm getting better stats, I swap it out, and then I go back and, on my merry way. And, of course, with my regen set on, I still have 60% combo, but you'll notice that my regen's at 4%. And so that allows you to kind of experiment with different types of builds. In the grand scheme of things, this is what I think a lot of people miss out on, is they don't They don't experiment. You've got to have, I think, a set for Counter-Strike, a set for combo, a set for crit, and a set for regen. And then you start to play with, what happens if I have skill crit in here? What happens if I have stun in here? Because there are different classes that will benefit depending on what type of stats you're going to inflate. Like in the case of, say like, for example, all right, one of the conversations that I am going to discuss with you today is actually whether or not, if I was going to do a Darklord, what am I going to want to do? How do I want to do that Darklord class? So, I mean, to kind of explain a Darklord, right? You'll notice that where here it's doing AoE, you're going to reduce the skill damage of your targets within range by 20% and boost skill damage by 50% by 10 seconds. You've got shoot an additional 3 combos and what have you. First basic attack, combo attack, and then yada yada increases combo. And you'll notice here it lowers combo damage resistance. Okay. When you look at the Darklord, you're going to notice skill crits where it finds its bonus. It increases attack, skill crit damage. All character skills deal 20% extra damage, and it ignores immunity, and then it makes basic attacks deal 100% damage after using an active skill. Okay? So, notate this with this in mind, okay? Because this is kind of key. When you compare this, okay, and the reason why people will go from Darklord to Prophet, and the main reason selling for it, okay, is you notice how in here it reduces skill damage resistance, okay, the same. However, break enemy shields instantly within attacks within 10 seconds. Okay, that breaking shields is one of the benefits of a Prophet. Plus, every stun is going to lower the active skills time. It's going to prolong active skills, except for Blitz Assault, by 40% and boost their damage by 10%. It's going to increase skill energy regen by 20%, so it's going to fire off more frequently. And then you have a 12% attack bonus and a 15% skill crit. So, where do you find yourself as a Darklord? What is going to be in that build that's going to make you that much stronger, right? Because where you're not popping shields, where you're a Prophet, you can pop a shield. What you've done is you've boosted your skill crit damage by 50%. So, inevitably, what I see a lot of people do is they'll run gear like, for example, of all the pieces of gear you can get, you're going to be wanting things that are going to ultimately increase your skill damage or weaken the opponent's skill damage as much as possible. And I think there are kind of a couple of ways that I could see where this could really work to your advantage. If you're looking at, say for example, if you get like the Summer Parasol, for example, right? This is going to give you a shield. It's also going to give you some attack speed, some energy regen. It's super great. Like the target of, say, like Beastly Might is not going to be as useful, but still worthy of mentioning. A lot of these are pay-to-win items, okay? And if you've been paying attention to a lot of these events, you would know that a lot of these are going to be very helpful to have in your arsenal if you don't already have them. But, free-to-play, you can just as easily pick up something like Lustrous Plumage. You can pick up Moonlit Wisp, and this is going to give you the skill damage that you're ultimately going to be looking for. Now, like in this case, crit rate and POW combo, still better, so we'll go ahead and take it. But the main thing that I'm trying to get to you with a Darklord is a lot of people don't go for it because of the shield being the biggest issue, is you don't have the ability to pop shields. So a lot of people that are going to pick out their Spore are probably going to go with Potent Spore, or they're going to go with Plume Spore because of just what the general benefit of the class. But in the case of like somebody that might be running, something that's, I would say, probably kind of an anti-build to other builds that exist against other players in PvP, I get the impression that Thorny Spore would be pretty advantageous because you're going to lower their class skills by 10%. That's going to be pretty interesting. Plus, going back to the fact that what oftentimes happens, right, is you're going to want high skill crit rate as a Darklord. But I'd like to think that, if you're going to run that build, you very much want to have as much as you can possible the possibility of firing off your skills, which means you're going to need skill regen, where normally you would get this free handed to you. I think what you end up doing really is you end up grabbing active skill energy regen, endless outburst, and you flack up your skill damage as much as you can. So you'll probably pick up skill damage in both trees. And then you may even invest the rest of that into skill crit damage, or maybe even get temporal compression so that you can do more damage. Okay? But that, I think, is generally the direction that you go in with a Darklord. Now, in terms of what you can choose in your gear, I think that ultimately becomes a question of whether you want to be a regen mage or if you want to be a skill crit mage. Skill crit mages, what they do is they basically inflate their skill crit as high as they can get it by wearing a bunch of skill crit gear. And then the second stat that I think, particularly with that build that I've seen, they either inflate. So, like, you know how I was telling you can inflate stun. That's great if you're a prophet. It's not great if you're a Darklord. You become kind of reliant on two different things that you can play on, which is that you can either inflate the invasion, which makes you almost immune to basic attacks, or because you're ultimately trying to kill them like right away. I don't see it as much, but I think it would be kind of interesting to play with, is to increase launch and skill crit as much as you can possibly can. By bringing these two up and then increasing your skill crit damage and your skill damage, you're basically making it so that you would pair this up, at least avian wise, with skills like the Pumpkin Witch in particular, right? And you would want to fire off as many, in terms of affixes, you'd probably want things that are going to be like inert gas, anything that increases skill crit damage, basically. Right, you're gonna go all in. I mean, obviously you could go with dense cloud just for the sake of getting your extra energy regen if you need it, but I think you could also make a case for running Pumpkin Witch, and basically what that'll do is give you a chunk of skill crit damage that you're gonna do on top of that as you're doing it, and that's gonna bounce to basically where in your talent tree you're inflating the amount of damage you're doing. Skill wise, I mean, this one's kind of questionable, but I would say you're probably going to run Crimson Moonfall. If anything, you'll have Star Array probably. And then the remainder of your skills, you can either approach it by running like Batty Trace and Spider Weaver. So out of there already, you've got 4 skills, and then that one extra skill can either be a Shroom Shield, or you could try lowering their attack speed or their attack with Easy Breezy or Take It Slow. And that's the PvP side of things. Alternatively, you could just as easily say take like where I was kind of like emphasizing on maybe using Moonfall. You could take Moonfall out, and instead of running Moonfall, you could try using things like Blitz Assault and try going that angle with it, giving yourself plenty of room to get immunity from Blitz Assault. That might come in handy there once in a while. I don't think there's going to be as many people running Clone Strike, but again, not going to say it can't be done, but I just don't think it would work as well. And when you look at like your souls, I think it's still going to be very much like you're going to want pretty much almost all of it into attack, a good chunk of it in defense, a good chunk of it into HP. And then what you'll more than likely do, where a Plume Monarch will dump it all into Blade Duo, your case is probably going to be more in favor of using Eye of the Abyss for the crit damage bonus and the skill crit damage bonus that you're going to obtain from that. But the biggest issue with it is you're not going to get as much of a return on this, and that makes me think you'll probably spend more of it in Wildlife Piercer just because of the skill damage ratio that you're going to gain out of it. Much in the same way that combo damage scales, off of combo multiplayer, I feel like you'll often find yourself wanting more skill damage, and then you'll kind of bring up your skill crit and your crit while you're at it. It's just not going to be a heavy focus. And in Class Awakening, you'll more than likely trade this out for the skill seal, so that way you get as much skill crit damage. I still think you'll probably want to go almost all in on attack, because again, having a really high global attack is very beneficial. And in terms of pals, okay, and then this is where it depends on where you are, but you're more than likely going to have Treasure Dragon because of the skill crit rate at 20%. Your second pal is probably going to end up being either something that'll increase your skill damage, which could be Fiery Tail. You could just as easily try to give yourself like a longer living life with Deer. You could, if you're going to run something with launch, and maybe instead of, let's say, working on launch and skill crit, maybe you do crit rate and skill crit at the same time and work on those two on your gear. Then you could conceivably go Benny, and then also maybe even grab, instead of Benny, maybe you grab Toothpick Eggplant, for example, and give yourself a higher crit rate along with your normal skill crit. And that might conceivably work. I think you'll more than likely use Hydrosprite. And then really that last option is going to be really dependent on whether you want to be more tanky. And if you want to live a little longer, you might use the Tortoise. As far as the new pals that are out there, like for example, there's Tenemo for pal crit, there's Frege for crit rate, there's Davi for skill crit rate. I think it's a given that if you can get Davi in a Darklord or a mage build, Davi's going to be a big must in that regard. But I mean, as far as that is concerned, that is the main, if anything, if I was going to build a Darklord, that's kind of what I would think about. In terms of gear pieces go, I mean, it all depends on what you have access to, but in artifacts, I would say almost any Darklord's going to probably find themselves either looking for items like, like Eye of the Raven, for example, would be bolsterous at best. You could easily find yourself probably doing, Skyward Blade even. But I would say the most beneficial artifact probably for a Darklord, honestly, at this point in time, is probably going to be either... You could either emphasize on the amount of crit you gain with your skill crit, because if you go that route, you'll get the benefit of using something like the Beast Roar Bow. That would be a pretty helpful one because of all the amount of skill damage and crit that you would gain on top of that. But you could just as easily go down the path of, say, like Under the Dome and be more PvE centric, because there are circumstances where you may find yourself doing better with high skill crit. And that, if anything, you'd be wanting to fire off your skills as quickly as possible, so you'll probably want to invest in things like Hydrosprite and active skill energy regen and trying to buff the amount of times you fire off your active skill, and then basically from there you're just going to try and fire off as many skills as you can. So things like Magic Carpet or Cloud Drifter are going to be helpful in that regard, because if you go with Cloud Drifter, you'll get another 10% to your skill crit, but then boost your attack for 20%. You can go Magic Carpet or Eye of the Raven, and that's going to fire off the number of skills you have, and that's just going to make you that much more deadly. So that said, that's really kind of what I would recommend and what I suggest if you plan to go down the Darklord path. Ultimately, guys, I hope you guys watch this end of the video if you want to save some money, and I'll see you.